welcome to Drugs Unwrapped with me, Rob, and also Jamie. It's an emergency podcast episode, James.
Yeah.
First one of the kind, and obviously it's in relation to the drug-related death data that came out yesterday, which was the 19th of December. Jamie, general thoughts around the data that came out? So Wales, we actually saw a slight reduction in the amount of fatalities associated to substances. But what's your general reflections on the data that came out?
I think even though on a national level that we've seen a reduction in the drug-related deaths, if we kind of like look into the data then for areas, some areas have obviously got a slight increase in those deaths. And, you know, as we full well know, any death associated to drugs in our area of work is really unfortunate. And is it a reflection on services? I would say no. You know, there is still a long way for us to go in regards to delivering a service which meets the people who use substances where they're at. And I think those are the areas that we need to kind of explore. But I also think like the dialogue needs to be not just focused on quantitative data, but we need to be having the conversations around what are we actually doing, what does that work look like, and how can we make these improvements, and if we can, will we be able to see then the benefits from our work, and then we can come back and kind of say then no look, this is what we're doing, this is what we've achieved during this period. And knowing from my area that I work in, you know, the amount of time and effort that goes in to delivering services, campaigning, advocating on the rights of those people who are most at risk or most vulnerable, and those who don't necessarily know that they may have challenges with their substance of choice and their substance use, is to kind of remove those barriers to get people in and accessing harm reduction services as and when they needed, but to have that bespoke approach to a peripatetic service for them and what meets their needs. So I think like the conversation that we've kind of pulled together quickly today, we're probably going to be, you know, bouncing around many topics, because I don't think it's just as simple as drug-related, opiate-related drug death. We've got to look at the much bigger picture, and there's so many facets there that we've got to pull on to be able to kind of give a true reflection of what it's like out there now using substances and those risks which can be prevented. But what opportunities are we missing as services? And that's services from grassroots, you know, right through to statutory and health, etc.
So what are services doing then, would you say, in terms of to try and mitigate these issues that are kind of coming up?
Right. So talking from our own perspective, we're seeing services kind of really put a lot of time and effort into promoting the severity and the seriousness of drug-related deaths and how they can be avoided. Now, the messaging for us is that kind of like the need to break down all those barriers and the stigma and the language which people use in relation to people who use substances, educating all services from primary to secondary to be able to work with people with potential overlapping unmet needs, right through to your being able to manage and use your drugs methodically on a day-to-day basis and coping maybe quite well. But you're always going to be at risk because of the way that legislation is with regards to the Substance Use Act. Then that will always be the devil in the detail, because there is no product control, no ability to be able to, you know, to be able to say that the substances that we're using are safe and they are what they are actually using. Couple that with then the highlights of the information that we've got to disseminate through all our open forums in regards to harm reduction messaging around then risk factors, like we've seen in our local resources, and, you know, Wedinose being one mechanism which we use regularly in regards to highlighting and the increase and the potential risk factors to do with synthetic substances. So these kind of things then are, I think, we have very little control over, but at least we can get that information out there. When we've got that information out there, is how do we engage with then the population of the people that we're working with. And we've got to remember as well now, because of the ease of access and the way the marketplaces are set up with drugs, that is so much more accessible than what it's ever been before. And like we said, some of the barriers and some of the situations that we've spoken about in-house, how does a treatment support service replicate a drug line? How can I get a service to someone sat at home who can pick up a phone, text, use social media to get substances to them without ever leaving their house? And how do we replicate that business model in the same way with regards to support? And one of the starters for 10, I suppose, is making sure that all our services are peripatetic. Our services are one-to-one. Our services can be designed to be bespoke and meet the needs of the individual, and not one size fits all. But also kind of realizing then the influence and the impact that the drug markets have had, and some of the issues that we've had with other substances and the supply routes being decreased significantly, and the demand then from the marketplace looking at alternatives. So now you've got the alternative marketplace, which has been primed with relation to synthetic benzodiazepines, and the availability has increased tenfold. And when we're doing our non-fatal reviews, which I'll go on to explain a little bit more, is that many drugs now in coroner's reports, in toxicology reports, are featuring. So we can't sometimes just say, oh, it's opiate drug-related death. It's a multitude, and that's without which we probably will go on to speak about, is like the increase in cocaine as well. So the marketplace is primed from that entrepreneurial aspect, whereby you could potentially make money from the situation that we're seeing and the marketplace being volatile, substances, their purity levels varying greatly, and individuals knowing now that certain substances, which they have always been their primary drug of choice, they're having to deviate and kind of like use other substances to be able to make them feel not unwell, to give them that detached feeling from some of the everyday challenges that they do have. That has put pressure then on services, because how do we adequately respond to anomalies and unknowns? So I think that's where some of the barriers and some of the challenges are. However, working together, across nationally with some of the areas of good practice, our drug poisoning task force, independent review panels, work closely together in regards to addressing and targeting individuals that may come to the attention of our services because they may have experienced a non-fatal overdose. That's an opportunity. It is still late because that could have gone either way, but that's an opportunity for us to kind of take the service, go to the individuals. Give you a prime example. It was only yesterday afternoon. We have an individual who'd come up on our drug related, who'd come up on our drug poisoning task force, and we've obviously got their details through ways and means of the reporting that comes through to our case review coordinator. Our case review coordinator pulls off the incident, the date, the time, gets any of the information around where this person lives or who they may be residing with. I myself went out to see that individual, who I've got a working relationship for many years because they've accessed service since they were a young person, and was able to ask them, first and foremost, are you okay? And I think that's the human touch, is being able to say, they were very surprised that someone had come to their door and asked them, are they okay? Because I've heard that you recently overdosed on this date. And she was taken aback by that. And she was like, oh, she was surprised that I turned up on the door because she hadn't seen me for a long time. And two, that actually someone cared. So I think that for me is like that model of approach in being able to try and engage with someone who is high risk, and knowing their background and historical trauma, in and out of services, one day in treatment, the next not, has kind of obviously complicated her treatment pathway. So what we're hoping to do now is that we take the service to them, and that we're able to then give them the service, find them the appropriate service delivery point, and that when they when they can access treatment, which is then out of my hands because I don't know whether they'll be accepted through to whichever treatment service, whether they meet the certain services criteria on based on many things such as are they complex or are they not complex but willing to engage with treatment services, so then will potentially be accepted onto their treatment pathway. So I think it's that and the unknown and the next step. The fact that I think we've done the hardest part. We've engaged with them. They were very much like, please, I want support. I really do. I've been trying to build up the confidence to come in, but I've not been able to because the last time I was on a script, I fucked up. So it's like that kind of like I let other people down, and that's the barrier sometimes, is because every time they come into treatment, some people have gone, this is it for me, it's the last time in, I'm going to do it, and they tell everyone and they're really pleased they're on a script, but then the reality is that their circumstances or situations haven't changed.
Yeah.
So it's really difficult. And I think from our perspective, that outreach and that kind of humanistic approach and like someone showing like that we care for them, I think it's so empowering and so impactful that we can we got to keep on replicating that. And that isn't just for people who use opiates, or we're talking about taking a full spectrum harm reduction approach, ketamine,
You love that.
I do I think but you know why? The reason why I say it is because I think that I think I'm very conscious of our services always being aligned to, you work with just opioids, you're just alcohol. And I think we've got to kind of shake that off and be kind of more accessible for everyone, because as we can see from the report, I think from all substances, death rates, are going up, poisonings are going up. Every month, our figures that we reviewed in the non-fatal panels, we talk around all different substances there, and we don't talk about alcohol as much per se, but alcohol sometimes does play a factor in that as well. So it's really quite challenging and complex way in which we're trying to work, and also it's very resource heavy as well. You've got to think about the staffing, the time, how and when is best to go out to meet these people, where you meet them, the need then to what's the next response if you go to see someone and they're not in a great place there and then. So time and resource is needed and should be invested more so as well in that generic approach anyway, of working with people in their communities rather out of buildings in the city centre or wherever you are, is that service. And I think some services that are more based in, depending on their geography, based in areas of rurality, they've got it right. If they're going out and delivering services in the community, that's perfect. We shouldn't really be any different in the more populated areas either. We should be going out to there, to the hot spots. Different parts of cities, people don't really venture outside maybe 3 or 4 streets. So we've got to be there. I'd not take for granted that some areas maybe you see more poverty and see people more under the influence, but also other areas of which wouldn't be considered or would be considered more affluent, they also too have their issues with drugs and alcohol. So that's why we've got to take those services, because I think depending on, doesn't matter what demographic you are, you do experience barriers and stigma to come into services.
You mentioned different kind of drugs, James, and obviously you mentioned around opiates and stuff. It's quite interesting from obviously the Welsh perspective. So heroin and morphine related deaths was was 64. I don't necessarily want to get bogged down in the specific kind of figures, but it was 64, which is the lowest figure in Wales since 2014. So what's that? 8 years? No,
Yeah,
9 years.
9 years.
Um, so that was 64, but cocaine is 52, benzos is 53, and if we go back to like cocaine, so that's the highest figure it's ever been in terms of cocaine related deaths. Compare that to 2014, so 9 years ago, that figure was 7.
Yeah,
So, the cocaine related deaths in Wales has significantly risen. If we take England and Wales, you're looking at over 800 related deaths to cocaine, which, again, kind of is kind of parallel really in relation to the significant increase that we've seen in Wales. What's the reason then for cocaine specifically, would you say? Because I know in terms of with your service that you do come across a lot of people that use cocaine and crack. Is it down to availability? Is it down to preference? What do you believe is going on there in terms of cocaine?
so I think like, yeah, the things you just said, Dan, I think you have got to factor in availability as well as one contributory factor. I would say, talking from our experience of the drug poisoning task force and our having a specific case review coordinator that coordinates now all the data and information. If I go back to 2014, when I was still here, working in the field, aged 12. Um, uh, I remember I couldn't have I had no access to any of that data really. It wasn't particularly great. Um, is there a consistent measure of coroners reporting from toxicology and the reasons for those deaths as well? Has there been a change in practice in now reporting in their area of work? Our drug poisoning task force, now the information that I can get from our case review coordinator, Keris, little name drop for her there, who does an absolutely fantastic job in giving data in relation to where, simple things such as like, is the person in treatment? Is the person out of services? Have they ever come into services? What area they're from? And we can find little trends, pockets, associate. It's almost taking that contextual safeguarding approach to those environmental factors. What else we're seeing then is obviously, like you said, the availability being a huge factor in that. The types of dealing, from a heroin and crack cocaine being sold together, one white, two brown, two bright, two brown, one white, the deals and offers that are in place. It's easily transportable. It's quick and simple. The transportation links, social media, accessibility to people that you could potentially wouldn't have never crossed paths with before. You can actively look through them on social media, regardless of what age you are. All those elements, I think, have played an increase in the increase of deaths and overdoses with in relation to crack and cocaine. We're seeing as well that the availability for people who are in recovery or in treatment as well. A lot of people who are in treatment, maybe the primary drug of choice was opiates, and now still using substances, but crack is that drug that they're using on top of their prescription medication. And when talking, anecdotally with some people who are accessing like prescribing services, it's a treat. It's a way of still being able to lose themselves, detach themselves from the day-to-day nonsense and troubles and issues that they're still fighting with. Because maybe sometimes it's great that they may be on a prescription, but I think sometimes services are lacking in the delivery of, CBT counselling, to address those past traumas. And sometimes I think we have been, as services, kind of, if at fault in regards to thinking that just because you've got a script, you should be all right now. They still got to go home and live in the areas that they live in, or live with people that they may be still using. If you're living in a HMO or a hostel or family members where drugs is still very much a part of your life, to expect someone to, just because you got a script, and is the prescription at the appropriate dose? Is that medication? But then there's challenges then to people who are just using crack cocaine. What have we got on offer for those individuals? Very limited. If you look at it from people, from a harm reduction perspective, what can we offer someone who's currently smoking crack? What can we offer someone who is using cocaine? What are our services? Are our services accessible for an individual that may use crack or may use cocaine but is working full time? Can they access services in the evening? Can they access services on the weekend? So I think we've got to explore opportunities to break down those barriers once again. I've seen those kind of some of those challenges from that. Give you a funny so in from a Southwest Police perspective, who have been really helpful in trying to liaise with people that we're working with. What one of the decisions we made was, when they were doing operations and they confiscated phones that were used in the distribution of text messages about deals and stuff, what they decided to do was put a basic text out just saying, like, to that person that your number has been attached to a phone that's been recently seized in connection with a drug line. If, just to let you know that this now is, we've got your number, but if you are experiencing any challenges or issues with drugs, please contact your local drug agency, being ours. So I was able then to kind of take or receive phone calls from people whose basically phones had been, their phone numbers were attached to a line, shall we say, and they were first kind of really concerned that their number now was under police investigation. We were obviously able to alleviate their anxieties around that, but they were quite concerned about that. But after having a very open and honest, frank chat with them, I was able to say, "Have you got any issues? Is there anything that And then it would come up. They would say, "Well, actually, yes, I have been using crack, and it is a problem. And would I be able to access your services?" So even from a punitive approach, from whereby drug lines have been stopped for maybe a minutia, a minute or so, because they're often replaced very easily. We've had moments of success where we've been able to engage with people that would necessarily come into contact with our services, and I just happened to then be the person that they managed to speak to on the other end of the phone, and was able to say, "Have you ever been in services before?" And a few of them were like, "No, I've not come across your services. I wasn't aware of your services," but was very much in the throes of their cocaine or their crack use. And it was becoming problematic in many ways, from their own mental health, physical health, relationships, having impacts on their education or their job. And we were able to hopefully have an earlier intervention. But then the question is, and were the services that we were providing applicable to their needs? Did they feel like, did they feel there was a therapeutic alliance, should we say, from the person that was sat opposite from us as a service provider? And was what the information we were giving resonating with them? And was it going to be able to, one, start them off on their road to recovery, or be enough to be able to facilitate that they got the information from a harm reduction perspective, and that information was good enough, and if they ever needed to come back, they've had a good experience, and they would come straight back to us and be able to kind of liaise that. So that's, I think, where we're at with regards to like crack cocaine, and like I said, it's a lot bigger picture, and I probably only just dipped my toe in the issue there. But once again, just to emphasize, availability has definitely increased significantly.
And hopefully crack pipes will help as well in the future if they're able to be given out.
Yeah.
Very, very briefly, James, just to wrap up. In light, obviously, with the drug-related death kind of figures coming out, is there anything else that you would like to see continue to happen, or anything that like is probably you would say is your number one priority as a way to, I guess, continually reduce the harm associated to
I think
drugs?
I think the harm reduction agenda needs to be pushed a lot more. We're not just on about, getting people from one end of the spectrum to the other, from harm, from using to stopping, abstinence. I think we've got to work with the people that we're working with in situ, where they're, take the services to where they're at. But we can't do that on our own. I think we've got to take a holistic approach, and I think communication with our local partners, taking on that co-production model, joined up working approach, but with the key stakeholders are the people that we're delivering services to. So they need to be the voices. They need to be the people that are telling us what's hot and what's not, so that we can then fluidly adapt our services to meet their needs. But I think then we just can't keep it local. We have to then see what the nationals perspective is on, and seeing what nuances there are in certain areas, because we're not going to be all the same. But I think that practice should be a national approach, which should be either filtered from the bottom up or from the top down, and that free flow of communication. There's some predominant voices that sometimes hold court in relation to the opinions on that, but sometimes they're representing people that haven't got the voice, and sometimes that information is politically driven. And I think what we need to be doing is always consulting people and giving the people the right to have their voice heard. And I don't think that forum is given a proper place at the table, especially for those people who are still actively using. We hear a lot from people who have kind of achieved, their elements of their recovery or achieved abstinence, but we don't hear enough from people who are actively using. And I think those are the voices, because they're the people who are getting older, who are experiencing other challenges of accessing primary care, secondary care. And that's why I think that's a really important part for me, is to highlight that the voices are not being heard or spoken or allowed to be given a platform to speak. And that for me is key, is what I'd like to end on anyway.
Sound. Thank you, James. That was the absolute business as always. Thank you, James, and we will see you all soon. Bye bye. If you have been affected by any of the issues discussed in today's podcast, please reach out. Barod have a free and confidential live web chat service that is available 7 days a week on our website at barod.cymru, where you can chat to a trained support worker. Alternatively, you can contact Wales's National Drug and Alcohol Helpline, Dan 24/7, either by calling 0808 808 2234 or text Dan to 81066.